Hey, my friends, it's Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, and we are landing the plane on Galatians chapter 2 right now. Honestly, in all the history of the time we've spent together on this podcast, there have been very few passages that are as dense and applicable and significant to the people back then, and frankly, to you and me reading it now, as the passage we've been working on here at the end of Galatians chapter 2. It's really important. Paul is acting like it's really important, and hopefully, with the exception of a few clown hammer jokes, we have treated it like it is very important. And today, we're going to land the plane on Galatians chapter 2, the whole first act of the book of Galatians, which really is just going to tee up Act 2 of the book of Galatians that we'll get into tomorrow. So that's enough introducing. We're going to pick up where we left off in our last conversation and round out Galatians chapter 2 right now. Effectively, Paul is saying the law approach not only doesn't work for salvation, it's the wrong tool, but the law approach, it makes you reactive. And even if it looks like obedience, you're getting there in a way that isn't nearly as effective as this other way, which is the gift of God and not born out of the works of any person or the effort of any person. And now all that's left is one final verse, one final spike of the football in this chunk of the book, in this densely packed theology bit that Paul is leading us through here. And it goes like this, Galatians 2:21, last verse of the chapter. I do not set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. And that really is a summary of the entire argument, the entire thing he's critiquing for the first two chapters. That's it right there. Guys, it's the grace thing is the only way. I mean, Paul, of all people, would understand what those who are coming from being saturated in the law, raised in the law, seeing the beauty of the law. He knows it's going to be hard for those people. He went to school with them. He is them. He hurt, jailed, and maybe even killed people. He was so immersed in this old way of thinking. He's going to understand it, and he's going to get it. And it really, even though it seems like this is just a lot of mean, forceful argumentation, these really are the words of life that he's repeating, and there's a patience here that Paul is demonstrating toward the people who've got it wrong by even taking the time to lay it out and engage with their idea. But here again is the final thought on the entire matter. To separate yourself from the grace of Christ, to try to accommodate a little bit of human effort as well, to mix that in, to just try to meet in the middle with the more law-oriented Christians and just like, let's split the difference. Let's do a little bit of their thing with the human effort and action as a way to be right with God. And we'll do a little bit of our thing with the whole, it's a gift from God. The grace of Christ is how we have right standing with God. We'll just mix them together to have compromise so we can just try to move forward in unity. No, he's saying we can't do that. They're not mixable. And I'm not going to in any way set aside the grace of God. I can't. Total paraphrase is mine here, but I've used this expression before. To cut oneself off from the grace of God is to saw off the branch on which we sit. He's not willing to budge on this, and he's telling the Galatian church, don't budge on this. Don't give an inch, because they're wrong and their idea doesn't work. They're trying to drive nails with a saw, and they're getting mad that you're telling them that isn't what a saw is for. Because if righteousness could be gained through the law, why wouldn't we just do that? Why would no one have figured that out yet? Why wouldn't it be working? Yet theoretically, everybody involved in this conversation has embraced Christ. Well, why do you even need him then? If the law would get it done and human action would get it done, then Christ is an unnecessary addendum with all of his talk about grace and forgiveness and whatnot. I don't need any of that crap. I can just behave super well. I did pretty well last year, but this year I'm going to grit my teeth. I'm going to double down. I'm going to get like 10 more accountability partners. I'm going to carefully go through the law, and I'm going to write 10 bonus protective laws for every one law that's in the real law. And you will not believe how exemplary my behavior is this year. I'm going to earn it. I don't take handouts. I'm going to earn it. No. it doesn't work. How can that be? Why would any of these people who were in the law and Jewish Christians who Paul's talking to here, why would they have made any ovations toward Christ at all? What would be the point? Just earn it through righteousness then, if you can do it. Oh yeah, guys, you know you can't. You're holding on to an old cultural thing that you misunderstand anyway. The law was meant to point you to Christ. Christ is the fulfillment of the law. The law then is doing a wonderful job and has done a wonderful job of serving its purpose. Now, thanks to God's providence over history, his authorship of the law, his preservation of his word, we see Christ right in front of us. We see Christ crucified, and indeed we are crucified with Christ and no longer live, but Christ lives in me. What comes out of that? Awesome stuff, Christ-like stuff, and that's so much of the theme of what's going to happen throughout the rest of the book of Galatians, especially as we get to Act 3 of the book of Galatians. I would call this the end of Act 1. I mean, we're going to be dipping back into this chunk we've spent the last 2 weeks on quite a bit as we move forward. But effectively, this wraps up Act 1. I don't set aside the grace of God, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. Paul concludes Act 1 by saying, there are not two ways to right standing with God. There is one way, Jesus. Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. He is the one name under heaven by which men must be saved. He is the one mediator between God and man. It is Christ plus nothing. And if you so much as work in 10%, 5%, 1% of your own effort and action and obedience to the law and upholding to the law, then the whole Jesus thing is a moot point to you. It's Christ plus nothing. It's Christ plus nothing. It's Christ plus nothing. Paul says the negative 3 times. Verse 16, a man is not justified by observing the law. End of verse 16, because by observing the law, no one will be justified. And then in verse 21, for if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing. It's explicit, it's clear, it echoes through the ages. Paul has repeated his claims about what is false and what is true, but I think it'd be really reasonable if somebody sat through the last couple of weeks of this podcast or carefully read through the first 2 chapters of Galatians and was like, okay, he's making sense. I think Paul has a point here, but if it's really that important, I guess I'd like to hear him flesh it out a little bit more. I'd like to hear him work through these ideas a little bit more specifically. I would like to hear him explain exactly how this whole right standing before God, justification through Jesus thing actually works. Could we dive a little bit deeper since it's that important? And the answer is yes, we can. And that's where Paul is going to take us next as we move into chapter 3. But as we move out of Act 1, here at the end of chapter 2, man, put a pin in Galatians 2:20. If you memorize anything from the Bible ever, get that one on lockdown. If you don't memorize things from the Bible, maybe now's a good time to start. Get that one on lockdown. It is a clarifying and defining verse about what it was for Paul to be alive in Christ, what his new life, his new existence after receiving the gift of grace from Jesus looks like. And I think it has the potential to define the life of the Christian today in the same way. I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. On to the second act of the book of Galatians next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.